guests and ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a great pleasure for me to be here, and I'm really very grateful to the UNDP as well as to the government of Singapore for giving me this opportunity to write this book. I have been a civil servant myself in India, and if I had another opportunity to restructure or redesign the Indian admin service, it would have been very much like the Singapore civil service, with a very high degree of commitment, integrity, accountability, performance, and of course its contribution to national development. Today my presentation would be by and large confined to the chapter 5 and 6. Chapter 6 first, which is what are the lessons that one could draw from the Singapore civil service, lessons both for the developing as well as developed countries, and chapter 5, which is on the challenges for the Singapore civil service itself. My book has sought to answer some of these questions. What are those issues through which the Singapore bureaucracy has become effective and accountable, and what are the changes over the years which have been brought in the Singapore civil service to improve its performance, to make it more accountable, and what is the environment which has been created, which has empowered public service institutions, etc. So these are some of the issues which I have examined in my book. But as I said, I would be focusing much more on the lessons which one could draw for the developing as well as developed countries. I think some of the policies which have led to individual excellence can be summarized in just about 6 bullet points. The most important being, as Kamal had also pointed out, that government started in the 60s with its very heavy emphasis on eliminating corruption from public service, and that was done much before the salaries increased in the civil service in the 80s. So therefore, by the end of 70s, corruption had already been minimized. Then its focus on recruitment on the basis of merit, to recruit the best and the brightest, not on the basis of patronage or favoritism, to pay competitive salary, which is important, but what is more important is to reward those who are doing well through non-monetary incentives. These could be as important for civil service, for their morale, as getting a high salary. And some of these could be more challenging tasks, influential assignments, public recognition, and training opportunities. So therefore, even when countries are not able to pay very high salaries, I think if the system is such which rewards good civil servants through these non-monetary incentives, that would really be building their morale. Of course, the use of ICT, which has meant more transparency, it has brought government closer to the people, it has reduced delays, and that is one thing where Singapore has really done very, very well. Linking promotion and pay increments with both potential and actual output of the public servant, and that is, as I said, is important. And then training, 100 hours of compulsory training every year. And what I found was most striking in Singapore was long tenure of deputy secretaries and permanent secretaries. Unfortunately, in India, the tenure, especially at the state level, is very short. It could be just about a year or 2 years, as opposed to Singapore, where I found that deputy secretaries and permanent secretaries spend something like 5 to 10 years on a single job, which means that they are able to contribute a great deal because they have then the expert knowledge, they have the domain knowledge of that subject, and their leadership is much more credible. In addition to this, there are also many changes which result in maximizing institutional outcomes. And this is delegation. Singapore has delegated parts of recruitment, parts of fixing salaries to boards and autonomous agencies, whereas the power of oversight is still with the central agencies. So therefore, delegation has been done, but the control of audit or through monitoring is still with the central agencies. Then building of institutions through PS21 and various experiments like this, which has really instilled a sense of pride and ownership amongst the civil servants. Then, of course, setting service standards and citizens' charter, knowing people that what is the service that they can expect. If there is an accident, in how much time people can expect police to reach the place of accident, and so on and so forth. So therefore, that has also meant that the civil service, the public service is to perform according to the standards laid by government. Budgetary reforms, about which Kamal also talked, and I would show about this. Leading by example, I think in any organization it's very important that the leaders, the top people, they show how to perform. And then, of course, traditions created by the early generational leaders, that's an important factor which has built the institution through these years. One thing which I found very striking about Singapore is the massive increase in Division 1 officers from 5% to 52%, and the massive reduction in Division 4 officers from something like 37%. If you take both Division 3 and Division 4, something like 65% to just about 20%. This, I think, is important because often one finds that in developing countries like India, the percentage of those who are in support positions, they are drivers or peons or clerks, that is very, very high. Now in India, unfortunately, the percentage of grade 3 and grade 4 is still as high as about 92%. So therefore, one lesson one could learn from this is to put more people in positions of responsibility and authority, where decisions can be taken, and where people are able to perform without referring the files or papers to their bosses all the time. Then, as I said, flexibility in budget releases. Unfortunately, in many countries, one finds that a lot of time is wasted in referring matters to the finance ministry, and you find that in the first 6 months of the year, not much expenditure takes place because of papers moving to and fro. Whereas in Singapore, each ministry is given a block budget for 5 years. They can borrow from the future years, or they could spend less this year and spend more next year. This kind of flexibility gives a great deal of authority to the departments and ministries, and this also leads to more professionalization and better expenditure and better outcomes. Benefits of e-government are very well known, and in fact this is one point where easily one could emulate the example of Singapore, because as this shows, not only time is reduced, but also ICT brings government closer to the people. And this is one reform where which can easily be done in developing countries, because this doesn't sort of give that kind of threat to those who are in power. It's not very complex. It is technology driven, but it may appear to be simple, but its long-term implications are very good. because it leads to more transparency, it leads to more efficiency, and this is something one could easily learn, and this would be politically very, very acceptable to everyone. What I found very striking about Singapore was the sequencing of reforms. One example which I would like to give here is about the HR functions. Generally what happens is that we delegate first without building the system. Now in any organization you require both. You require control mechanism, you also require performance mechanisms. Performance mechanisms which will mean more authority to the lower officials, more authority to those who are actually implementing programs, but at the same time there has to be some kind of a system by which one could judge whether these organizations to whom power has been delegated, are they performing well or not. So therefore, whether it is through audit, whether it is through evaluation, whether it is through monitoring, we need a system by which the performance and the actual outcome is measured. And this is something I found very striking in Singapore, that these functions are delegated, autonomous agencies were given powers, but after the system had been built, so that there was no danger that those to whom power has been delegated, they will misuse it, or they would resort to recruitment on the basis of patronage, etc. So therefore that is very important. And similarly, as has already been pointed out, that corruption was controlled by the 70s, whereby salaries increased only in the 80s. In fact, soon after Singapore got independence, the salaries of the Division 1 people were reduced because government did not have enough resources to pay them well. So therefore, the general impression which is there in many developing countries that we cannot pay well, and therefore there is corruption, is not correct at all. Corruption, as I think Kamal also said, is because of greed, not so much because of need. It continues because it is a low risk and high reward activity. And the challenge is how to make it high risk and low reward activity. So therefore that is how Singapore's example could easily be replicated. In fact, I had, not in this book but elsewhere, I had calculated what is the average salary given in India as a multiple of per capita GDP. And I found Indian salary is the highest in the world. It is 7.2 times per capita GDP, whereas the world average is just about 2.6. And Singapore, I do not know, I think between 3 and 4. So therefore, as a multiple of per capita GDP, we have, India is paying very, very high salaries. But as you can see from the newspaper reports, in the last 6 months, a large number of scandals have been unearthed in India. So therefore, this is one lesson one could easily draw from Singapore, that given the political will, given the whole desire to control corruption, it can easily be done. Then I think in order to achieve results, it's very important that the performance must be measured. Often we spend money, but we do not know how that money has been spent. We may build schools, we may appoint teachers, whether teachers are teaching, whether it is resulting in quality education, that needs to be measured. So therefore, measurement of performance is very important. And last year when I was here, I saw this example where the town councils in Singapore, their performance was measured, and they were graded on the basis of 4 key areas: state cleanliness, state maintenance, lift performance, etc., etc. So therefore, it's important to instill a feeling of competition amongst the service providers. Those who are in charge of service delivery, they must know that their performance is measured, and then they will be rewarded if they perform well. Often the devolution in a large country like India, devolution is not based on performance, it is based on indicators like backwardness or poverty, and not so much on performance. Then of course, any country would need to take large number of decisions which may not appear to be very popular to begin with, but which are important in national interest. And this is where Singapore has shown us how to do what is right and not what is popular. This is not, very few democracies can be bold enough to say this, but I was very impressed by Singapore examples. And one example which my wife found very striking and very interesting was a very high price of cars in Singapore. Not many people can buy motor cars here, which has resulted in a control of traffic because she drives herself in Delhi and we are often held up because of traffic jams. Whereas in Singapore, one found that despite being a very rich island, traffic is much better controlled, and that's all because of very high registration fees on cars and the system of ERPs. Integrated resort was also, when it was launched, not very popular. There was a lot of opposition, but it showed that yes, it has improved employment, and therefore there is now, I think, greater acceptance of this idea. Reliance on immigrant labor, this is a controversial issue, so I will not say much on this. Because whenever I travel, when I come to Singapore, the only opportunity I get to talk to common people is when I talk to the taxi drivers, and they are all very much against this measure. And yesterday also we were discussing, and I thought that perhaps when I come to discussing inequality, increasing inequality, how to have a trade-off between decline in inequality and economic growth. That's a very big issue, very big challenge, on which I will come later. Now, what are the challenges facing the Singapore public service, and how Singapore is equipping itself with this? It is very important, first of all, to realize that situations keep on changing. Countries' needs, countries' problems keep on changing. And Singapore, I think, realizes this, and from time to time one finds that there have been radical reforms, such as in education, where the whole policy of streaming was given up because the need for change from just getting skilled labor to more creative, more innovative people, because as your nature of your industry changes from just being labor-intensive, export-oriented, to knowledge-oriented, you require manpower which is more creative, more innovative. So therefore, the radical reforms which took place in education is a good example of how Singapore is equipped with making these changes. At the same time, there are many challenges which we have discussed in Chapter 5. One, of course, is how to ensure that officers have the right kind of skills and the right kind of aptitude. There is this feeling that although Singapore civil service is very homogeneous, but they have not worked in the private sector or social sector, and therefore they do not understand many of these issues. There is also this feeling that there is admin service dominates, and those who are not scholars, those who are not in admin service, they feel left out, and the promotions, etc., for them are not so quick, with the result that there is a great deal of attrition. Now, attrition could be, high rate of attrition could be because of a large number of factors. Unfortunately, I have not studied this in detail, but my hunch is that because in Singapore promotions are quite quick, so those who perhaps are not promoted, they may be finding jobs outside governments rather lucrative. So that this is one issue where we need to look into in some detail. Also, how to engage and cater to the changing needs of rising aspirations of people. People in Singapore are more educated, more demanding, they want more transparency, and how to ensure that they are able to, they are involved in decision making, and they do not feel that they are being just told what to do, and they should be sort of a part of the decision-making process. Meritocracy is very important, but it may also be leading to more inequality, which is another important subject to discuss, and then how to deal with uncertain and complex cross-cutting policy issues. These could be a terrorist attack, this could be a situation like SARS, this could be tsunami or so and so forth. So therefore these black swans, as they are called, are really equipped to dealing with those issues which are highly improbable but will have very high impact. Now to say something a little more on these issues, the problem of high attrition and outlook, it could be because of promotions, as I said. John Kaw has studied this, and he feels that it is because of high turnover of public servants is because of the accelerated promotion of the scholars at the expense of non-scholars. And then it has led to a problem of arrogance of scholars and low morale of others that are endemic among other public officers, and which may have serious implications on the performance of the public service. This problem has been realized, and in fact, as early as 1991, Minister for Trade and Industry George Yeo has compared the Singapore state to a banyan tree, which has left no space for other independent groups to develop. And he argued that the tree had to be judicially pruned in order to allow independent groups to emerge. So therefore, as we need more participatory form of government, there has to be more space for non-state actors. And this is, in fact, as I said, this is an important issue, that how to see that there are more non-state players, how to emerge. In fact, this is also said by Kishore Mahbubani in an recent article, where he said that the population should rely less on government and more on non-state players to find solutions. So therefore, this is one issue where I think government needs to focus on. Inequalities are rising. In fact, this is a post-2000 phenomenon, and this chart I have taken, it's not in the book, it is taken from Gillian Cole's work, although the data is given in the book also, which shows that after 2000, Gini coefficient of inequality has been rising. And all those steps have been taken, like the workfare measures or like the training programs, but still, even if you account for that, one finds that inequality are high and rising. This is of course, very similar to a very large number of countries. In fact, after 1995, one finds that you look at any country throughout the world, you experiences that inequalities are rising. The only country where they have declined is Brazil. Brazil, as you know, is a highly unequal society, but inequalities have declined in the last 10 years because of the programs that they have of cash transfers to the poorest people. Bolsa Familia program is very well known, which has really resulted, and the amount of transfer is so high that it has reduced inequality. Otherwise, even in countries like Korea, which are much less unequal than Singapore, one finds there is slight increase in inequality. But this is, I think, a serious problem, because inequalities may result in social tensions, and it may not be good for the long-term growth of the country.